I call her my daughter, and I mean that in every way that matters. If you think you know where this story ends up, I'm going to ask you to trust me for a few minutes. Because you don't. My name is not important. What's important is that 31 years ago, I married a woman named Renee. No, wait. I need to back up even further than that. I was 53 years old the morning my ex-wife's lawyer called my cell phone. I was standing on the back porch of my house in Knoxville, Tennessee, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched yet because it was still too hot. The sun was coming up over the ridge. My daughter Lily was still asleep inside. She's 17. She has dyslexia so severe that her third-grade teacher once told me in an actual parent-teacher conference that I should, and I'm quoting here, adjust my expectations. I didn't adjust anything. The lawyer introduced himself as someone working on behalf of my ex-wife. I hadn't spoken to my ex-wife in 11 years. I set the mug on the porch rail and walked back inside. Let me tell you how I got there. I met my ex-wife. I'll call her my ex-wife because that's what she is, and because giving her a name in this story feels like more than she deserves. I met her at a company picnic in the summer of 1998. She worked in marketing. I was in civil engineering. She was funny and sharp and laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which I found endearing at the time. We dated for 2 years. Got married at a small ceremony in Asheville, her family and mine on a rented hillside with string lights and catered barbecue. I thought I was the luckiest man in the state of North Carolina. Our daughter Lily was born 18 months into the marriage. I remember the moment the nurse put her in my arms. I remember thinking, okay, this is it. This is the whole point. The problems started slowly, the way they always do when you're inside them. My ex-wife had grown up in a household where achievement was the primary language of love. Good grades, good schools, good careers. Her parents weren't unkind. They were just scorekeepers. And when Lily started missing milestones, not dramatically, not in ways that sent us rushing to specialists, but quietly, in the way a flower doesn't open on the schedule you expected, my ex-wife started pulling away. By the time Lily was 4, the reading difficulties were becoming clear. By 5, her teacher was flagging things. By 6, we had a diagnosis, severe dyslexia, with some processing delays that made traditional classroom learning genuinely painful for her. I want to be honest here. It was hard. It was hard in ways I hadn't expected and couldn't have prepared for. There were nights I sat in Lily's room after she fell asleep and just held her hand and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do next, how to fight for a kid in a system that wasn't built for her. My ex-wife's response was different. She started working later, traveling more for work or claiming to. She became someone who was present in the house but absent from everything that mattered. She stopped coming to Lily's therapy appointments. She stopped sitting with Lily during homework, which by then was a 2-hour ordeal every evening that required patience, repetition, and a willingness to celebrate the tiniest victories like they were championship wins. I'm not going to say I handled all of this perfectly. I didn't. There were arguments. There was a period of about 6 months where I kept hoping she would just come back. Return to the version of herself I thought I'd married. I kept thinking it was stress, or burnout, or something that could be fixed. She left when Lily was 7. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a slammed door. She packed while Lily was at school and I was at work. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said she was sorry, that she needed to find herself, and that she hoped I understood. I didn't understand. Lily came home from school that afternoon and asked me where Mommy was. I told her Mommy had to go away for a while. Lily nodded, and in that careful way she had even then, like she was filing information for later review. Then she asked if we could have grilled cheese for dinner. I said yes. I made grilled cheese. We watched a nature documentary about migratory birds. She fell asleep on the couch. I sat in the kitchen for a long time that night. The divorce was finalized 14 months later. My ex-wife did not contest custody. She did not request visitation. She signed the paperwork, took her portion of our shared assets, and relocated to Charlotte, where she eventually remarried. I know this not because we stayed in contact, but because mutual acquaintances talk, and because information has a way of finding you when you're not looking for it. I want to tell you about Lily, because this is really her story, more than mine. By the time she was 9, We had found a specialist, a learning therapist out of Nashville who worked with dyslexic kids using a method I can only describe as complete reprogramming. Not of Lily's brain, of the way information was delivered to it. Instead of forcing letters and words through the front door, she found windows, music, pattern recognition, spatial memory, things Lily could grab onto. And what Lily grabbed onto was mathematics, not arithmetic, not the stuff you memorize, but the kind of math that's closer to music, the kind where you see relationships between things, where numbers have shape and movement. By the time she was 11, she was doing geometry problems that her teacher admitted she couldn't check because she didn't have the background to verify them. By 12, she was communicating with a professor at the University of Tennessee who ran a summer enrichment program for gifted students. I'll be honest, I didn't fully understand what was happening. I'm a civil engineer. I know load-bearing calculations and soil composition. What Lily was doing was something else entirely. What I understood was this. Every time I put a new problem in front of her, she lit up. Not in a performative way. In the way a person lights up when they are finally genuinely being spoken to in their own language. Her reading was still hard. Still is. She uses text-to-speech software, audiobooks, voice memos. She's figured out her own systems. She wrote her first formal math paper, co-authored with that University of Tennessee professor when she was 15. It was published in a journal I can't pronounce correctly. The professor told me afterward at a dinner we had to celebrate that in 30 years of academia he had met maybe 4 students with Lily's kind of intuition. I drove home from that dinner and sat in the driveway for about 10 minutes before going inside. When she was 16, Lily was invited to participate in the National Mathematics Competition for students under 18. I drove her to the regional qualifier in Cincinnati. We ate terrible highway gas station food and listened to an audiobook the whole drive, and she complained that the narrator was reading too fast. She placed second overall in the regional. First among girls. 3 months after that, she received a letter, which I read to her, because that's still how we handle formal correspondence, from a private foundation that awards scholarships for exceptional young mathematicians. The scholarship was valued at $1.4 million, structured as an educational trust to cover tuition, housing, research funding, and living expenses through doctoral completion. I read the letter twice, then I read it a third time. Then Lily, who had been watching my face, said, "Is it real?" I said, "I think it's very real." She said, "Okay," and went back to the problem she'd been working on before the letter arrived. I called my sister. I may have cried a little. Just a little. The news, as news does, moved around. A local paper ran a small item. A regional education nonprofit featured Lily in their annual report. And somewhere in the chain of people who talk to other people who talk to other people, the information reached Charlotte. That's when my ex-wife's lawyer called. I went inside. I put the coffee on the counter. I sat down at the kitchen table and I listened. The lawyer explained that my ex-wife had retained him to explore what he called parental equity concerns related to Lily's educational trust. He used words like fiduciary and custodial history and equitable interest. He spoke in the smooth, unhurried way of someone who has practiced making unreasonable things sound procedurally reasonable. I asked him what, specifically, my ex-wife believed she was entitled to. He said she was prepared to argue that, as Lily's biological mother, she had rights to participate in decisions affecting the management of a financial instrument of this size. He said the amount in question was not insignificant, and that his client believed the existing custody arrangements, which had been drawn up when no assets of this nature were anticipated, should be revisited. I said, "She left when Lily was 7. He said he understood this was a complicated situation. I said, "Lily is 17. He said he appreciated that there were strong feelings involved. I said I need to call my own attorney and ended the call. I sat at the table for a minute. Then I heard Lily's alarm go off down the hall. I heard her move around in her room. I heard the particular quiet of her getting dressed, which takes longer than it used to because she has a system for her clothes. Tags removed from everything, certain textures on certain days. A routine that took us years to develop and that she follows with the precision of someone who has learned that the right morning routine is the foundation of a functional day. She came out to the kitchen. She looked at me. "You're not making eggs," she said. I said I got a phone call. She sat down across from me. She has a way of listening that's completely still. She doesn't fidget. She doesn't fill the silence. She just receives information and processes it, and you know she's working on it by the quality of the stillness. I told her about the call. I told her straight without softening it because Lily has never responded well to softened versions of things. She prefers the actual data. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she wants the scholarship money. I said that appeared to be what was being suggested, yes. She said, because she didn't know there was going to be money before. I said probably. She looked at the table. Then she looked up at me and said, I want to be involved in whatever happens. I said okay. She said, I mean actually involved, not just told about it after. I said I understood. She nodded. Then she said, can you make eggs now? I made eggs. My attorney, a man named Aldrich who I'd used for the divorce and trusted completely, was not surprised by the call. He told me he'd seen variations of this more times than he cared to count. A parent who disengages completely suddenly reemerges when an asset appears. He said the legal standing was thin, extremely thin, given that my ex-wife had voluntarily relinquished custody and had had no contact with Lily in 11 years. He said that did not mean she couldn't make noise, and that making noise was sometimes the whole strategy. File enough motions, create enough administrative burden, hope the other side settles to make it stop. I told him I wasn't inclined to settle. He asked what Lily thought. I said Lily wanted to be involved. There was a pause on the line. Then Aldrich said, how involved? I said I wasn't sure yet. What I found out over the following weeks, as the process ground forward and my ex-wife's attorney filed an initial petition requesting a judicial review of the trust's oversight structure, was that my daughter had been thinking. She had been thinking in the particular way she approaches math problems, not reactively, not emotionally, systematically. She had identified the variables, the relationships between them, and what would need to be demonstrated to resolve the question in a definitive rather than negotiable way. She came to me one evening while I was reviewing documents at the kitchen table. She set a folder down in front of me. Inside were 11 years of records. Not records I'd kept, though I had kept some. Records she had reconstructed. Doctor's appointment notes. School records with parent contact logs showing only my name, year after year. Therapy session summaries. The summer program correspondence. Awards and acknowledgment letters. A printed contact log from the Scholarship Foundation's portal showing every communication and the date and the participant. Every single one showing my name, my email, my phone number, across 7 years of application and follow-up. She had also printed the original divorce decree, with the section on voluntary custody relinquishment highlighted in yellow. She had also, and this is the part that I had to read twice, written a brief. A 12-page document, properly formatted with citations, laying out the timeline with mathematical precision, not emotional argument, not a narrative of abandonment, but a clean factual chronology demonstrating that the party currently claiming parental interest had exercised zero participation in any decision, medical, educational, financial, or otherwise, affecting the named beneficiary across a period of 11 years and 4 months. I looked up at her. She said, I showed it to Aldrich already. I said, you called Aldrich? She said, he gave me his number at the firm picnic last year. I emailed him. He said it was very thorough. I said, Lily. She said, I know the law isn't math, but the facts are still facts. If you present them clearly enough, they're hard to argue with. I didn't know what to say. I'm not a man who cries easily. I'm 53 years old and from Eastern Tennessee. And we are not demonstrative people in my family. But I will tell you that I had to look away from her for a moment. I said, you didn't have to do this. She said, I know, I wanted to. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, the same way she had the morning I told her about the phone call, completely still, waiting. I said, how long did this take you? She said, about 3 weeks, mostly evenings. I said, 3 weeks. She said, the citations took the longest. I'm not a fast reader. There was a hearing scheduled for a Thursday in October. The courthouse in Knox County is not a dramatic building. It's brick and fluorescent light and the smell of burned coffee from the break room down the hall. I've been in that building before, for the original divorce proceedings, and it felt different then. Smaller, sadder, the way endings feel. This time felt different. My ex-wife was there with her attorney. This was the first time I'd seen her in 11 years. She looked well. She looked like someone who had constructed a comfortable life and expected it to keep accommodating her. Her attorney was the same man from the phone call, smooth, unhurried, a person built for managing impressions. Lily was there. She wore her good blazer over a plain gray shirt. She had her folder. The judge was a woman named Hartwell who appeared to have significant patience for paperwork and limited patience for theater. My ex-wife's attorney made his opening argument. It was what you would expect. Biological parenthood. The unprecedented scale of the financial instrument. The need for appropriate oversight. He said the phrase equitable consideration 3 times in 4 minutes. Aldrich responded concisely. He submitted Lily's document, which he had reviewed, approved, and formally incorporated into our filing as Exhibit A. He walked through the chronology without drama. 11 years. 0 contact. Voluntary relinquishment. Every data point sourced and dated. Then Judge Hartwell asked a question I hadn't anticipated. She said she had reviewed the minor's contribution to the submission and found it notable. She asked whether the minor wished to make a statement. My ex-wife's attorney immediately objected on the grounds that a 17-year-old should not be expected to advocate in a proceeding affecting her own interests. Judge Hartwell looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Lily. She said, "Young lady, you are not required to speak, but if you wish to, I'm willing to hear you." Lily stood up. She didn't have notes. She'd told me beforehand she wasn't going to use notes. I told her that was her call. She said, "Your Honor, I have dyslexia. Reading has always been hard for me. My dad learned how to help me before anyone else figured out I needed help. He drove me to Nashville for therapy when I was 9. He read every application for the program that found me. He didn't do those things because he expected anything from them. He did them because that's what he decided fatherhood meant." She paused, in the way she pauses when she's chosen her next words very carefully. She said, "I understand there are legal arguments being made here about parental rights. I'm not a lawyer. But I've reviewed the documents, and I think the relevant question is simple. It's about presence. Presence is a factual matter. Either someone was there or they weren't. The record shows who was there." She sat down. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Hartwell made some notes. She asked my ex-wife's attorney if he had anything to add. He said something about the complexity of family dynamics and the limitations of documentation in capturing the full. The judge stopped him. She said she found the documentation adequate. She ruled from the bench. Motion denied. The trust structure remained as established. No modification to oversight. No parental equity claim recognized. My ex-wife and her attorney left without making eye contact. Aldrich shook my hand in the hallway and said he'd seen a lot of proceedings in 28 years and that one was going in the file. Lily and I walked out to the parking lot. It was a cool October afternoon, the kind of day that smells like wood smoke and the end of something. I said, "How are you doing?" She thought about it for a moment and said, "Fine, hungry." We drove to a diner we like near the university. She ordered a burger and ate about 2/3 of it, and then pushed the plate aside and pulled out the problem she'd been working on before all of this started. Printed on 3 sheets of paper, already half covered in her notes. She worked on it while I finished my coffee. At some point I looked across the table at her, head down, pencil moving, completely absorbed in something I couldn't fully follow. The afternoon light through the diner window. The quiet sound of the restaurant around us. I thought about the night she was born, about grilled cheese sandwiches and nature documentaries, about Nashville and Cincinnati and a letter I read 3 times before I believed it, about a 7-year-old who asked where her mother was and then asked for grilled cheese, because even then she knew how to move forward. I didn't say any of this. We're not a family that narrates our feelings out loud in real time. We're more the type to acknowledge them later, quietly, the way you acknowledge a thing that has been true for a long time and doesn't need to be announced. I just finished my coffee. She looked up from her work eventually and said, "Ready?" I said I was. We left a tip and walked out to the car. On the way home, she fell asleep in the passenger seat, which she still does sometimes on long drives, even at 17. And I drove through the Tennessee hills with the radio low and the windows cracked, and the particular feeling of a man who has exactly what he needs and knows it. I've been turning this whole thing over in my mind for a while now, the way you turn a stone over in your hand after you've carried it a long time and finally set it down somewhere. Not trying to make sense of it in a grand way, just looking at it plainly. What I keep coming back to is this. The outcome wasn't an accident. It didn't happen because we were lucky, or because the right judge showed up that day, or because life decided to be fair for once. It happened because of 1,000 small decisions made over 11 years by 2 people. One of them a middle-aged civil engineer from eastern Tennessee, and one of them a 17-year-old girl who does math problems the way other people breathe. Every choice my ex-wife made had a consequence that she didn't account for. She chose comfort over difficulty. She chose a clean life over a complicated one. She chose to walk away from a child who needed her. And in doing so, she forfeited not just the relationship, but the standing. You can't opt out for a decade and then opt back in when the numbers change. That's not how cause and effect works. That's not how any of this works. The court didn't take anything from her. She had already given it up, one day at a time, across 11 years of absence. And I think about Lily, about who she became, not in spite of the hard years, but partly because of them. She learned early that the world wasn't going to hand her things in the format she needed. She had to find her own way into every room, her own systems, her own tools, her own language for the ideas inside her head. That kind of persistence doesn't come from easy circumstances. It comes from showing up to the same difficult thing every single day until you've built something out of it that no one can take away. That's what grit actually looks like, I think. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a girl at the kitchen table every evening working through the same problem one more time, because giving up was never really on the table for her. And the brief she wrote, 12 pages. Citations. A clean factual chronology that a trained attorney called thorough. She didn't build that from anger. She built it from clear thinking, from the ability to separate what she felt from what needed to be demonstrated, and then demonstrate it. That kind of mind is something you develop. It doesn't arrive fully formed. You develop it by being pushed toward honesty, toward precision, toward doing the actual work of understanding something rather than just reacting to it. I did my best to give her that. I didn't always succeed. But I showed up. Every appointment, every application, every evening at the table. Not because I expected a return on it. Because she was my kid, and that was the job. What I know now, sitting on this side of all of it, is that character is just accumulated choices. My ex-wife's character accumulated in one direction. Mine and Lily's accumulated in another. The courtroom just made the accounting visible. Lily fell asleep on the drive home that evening. 17 years old, blazer still on, head against the window. I drove through the Tennessee hills and thought about how much of life is just showing up in the ordinary moments. Not the dramatic ones, not the ones that end up in courtrooms, but the grilled cheese sandwiches, the morning eggs, the problems spread across 3 sheets of paper on a diner table. That's the whole thing, really. That's all of it.